Hi, everybody. Welcome to All the Forbidden Things. This is the show where we talk about all the things we're not talking about. I am joined today by Nichelle Stevens. Nichelle is a local here in Savannah as well, and we met at a creative networking event.
Yes.
And we were asked certain prompts at the event, and then we were sort of talking about conversations that we wish we were having. And you said that like you wish people talked more about death
Yes.
and death doulas and death planning and all of the practical as well as the emotional aspects of what that means. And I thought we could kind of have a conversation here about it.
Yeah.
Nichelle is also, if you're local in Savannah, she's also looking to host a discussion with a bunch of different people and experts and just folks in the community. So without further ado, let's start off with a fun question. What do you think was like my favorite place I lived between New York, LA, and Savannah?
New York.
That was too easy. She already knew that anyway. Why did I do that? Well, also
It
New
was.
York as well.
I love living in New York too, but I mean, to me, it's for a particular time in life, and I don't want to live there when I'm 80. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Okay, so then I'll ask you what do I basically I'll guess what do I think was your least favorite aspect of living in New York. So let me take a stab at that. Probably just the noisiness of just the people everywhere. You can never get kind of REM sleep, if you will, energetically.
I think yes, a lot of that, and then these small inconveniences like missing the train and having to wait for another one, or I don't know, it just seems like sometimes there's a lot of hurry up and wait it, because there's so many people.
Yeah.
So
yeah. No, that's true. It's like exhausting. Here there's such a higher quality of life.
Yes.
Ooh, it's so nice. But yeah. Okay. All right. So we're gonna get into it. You have a question to ask me first.
Okay, so what do you think it's like if you were to lose someone suddenly?
Okay. So, and for a little bit of context, Nichelle lost a cousin last year.
Yes.
Suddenly. And so you can give us more details about that whenever if you like. But that was a sudden experience. So I have not had this before in my life. I would assume this is going to sound so crass, but I'll liken it to like a breakup that takes you by surprise, and the fact that you feel so secure, you feel like you have this continuity in your life, and you love this person, and then suddenly it's like the carpet's taken out from underneath you, and you're like swapped into a parallel universe. And you're like, I didn't choose this. I don't have any control over this. And like, I don't know where I am right now in a way, like in relation to, when I'm in this. So that would be, and I think the grief would probably feel like the pain would feel like a very sharp kind of a pain.
Yes. The British use the word more than we do, but gutted is what I think of when I found out. I felt gutted. And when you said the sharp pain, just feeling like I don't see someone just and just expose you.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like.
Wow. And how long did that kind of last?
I mean, that intensity was probably from when I found out that my cousin died through the funeral. So probably a month of that intense thing. And then later on it was less. And now it really is, I'm feeling it again because I'm coming on the anniversary because he died in July of last year. And I didn't, sometimes you don't think about how time passes. But that's why I noticed that people do, I don't want to call it celebrate, commemorate when the anniversary of someone's death. And I never really thought of that before. This is not the first time someone in my life has died, but I do see why people kind of feel it. It's almost like a tug, and
Mm.
that you have no control over. Going back to what you were saying about loss of control.
That reminds me of this very weird phenomenon that I think it was like these elephants or something were really close to this person, and then the person died, and they all gathered together from wherever they were and grieved. And then every year on the anniversary,
Oh,
it was like they knew, and they would all come back and then leave and reunite
yeah,
every year on the anniversary.
yeah.
It's really interesting. And that kind of leads into actually another topic that we talked about of do you think it's easier in general, we can just ask this overall, to lose someone um like who's been suffering, if you're thinking about watching them suffer and watching them die over a
Hmm.
long period of time, do you think it's easier as a loved one to go through that or to go through someone passing suddenly, and then like how does age play into that? So I would just ask you outright, like.
So I I had another relative die after having a heart and a lung transplant and being in the hospital for about 6 months. And honestly, we really thought, well, we were hopeful, but realistic. So when he did pass, it was not as much of a shock.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think there is a difference. A sudden death is, I mean, they even use that term. I was just thinking about that. I was watching a game show, and when it's tied up, they did a sudden death, and it's
Yeah.
like very a sudden death has this meaning of like now or never, or it's just like so critical. Um, so it has a different feeling. Obviously, a death is a death, but I do think it's just the way you react to it.
Mm-hmm.
Less time to prepare. Less
Yeah.
less that's the I think that's the biggest difference. Is no time to prepare.
Yeah. And when you think about like an older person and you see them sort of going, you've got the birth where they're sort of like here, and then you rise to your climax, and then they kind of go back down again, and you're watching them fade. It's easier because you're not losing the person at the peak of their
Yeah.
life. And so it's kind of like you're losing a slightly different person than when they're just taken suddenly. Okay, that leads me to the question of like how much do you think I think about or plan for death in my life?
How much do you? I mean, I guess my question is, have you thought about setting up a will, or do you have an idea of, even if you were sick, who would be basically your power of attorney and that kind of thing? This is more of a practical,
Yeah,
kind of
but
thing.
what would be your guess on me? Not knowing me at
Uh,
all. Like just have to wild guess
I
based on
guess
maybe my age or
you
something.
may have maybe have thought of who you would want to kind of take over your, I guess, finances or whatever, but I'm not sure if you have a will yet.
No. It's interesting because I've got my parents, and then I have a few other loved ones who are around their age.
Mm.
Um, and I think a lot now about their final stages of life. And especially like my grandma's in her 90s, and she's currently in a phase where her health, just by nature being old, is really high maintenance.
Hmm. Hmm.
It costs a lot of money.
Hmm.
My parents are running out of ways to figure that out themselves. And then they're going to be facing that. And then, so I think about it in that way a lot. And then I sometimes think about the idea of like, I'm unmarried. I'm unlikely to end up with, certainly not going to have kids. So I'm unlikely to end up with someone by my side when I'm old. So I think that has pressured me to drastically try to up my financial planning
Mm-hmm.
because in my brain, I feel like when you're, especially like when you're in your 20s, you don't think that you are going to die.
Oh, no.
It's just not like that happens to other people. It doesn't happen to me. And then in your 30s, I think, especially I'm 36 now, and I think going over that hurdle of 35, I'm like, oh my God, I'm like kind of in middle age, reaching middle age, towards middle age. And like, what that means that the next phase after that is one where I'm like gonna want to maybe retire or whatever. And so I think it's created something financial stuff, but I have not ever thought about dying before I'm old. I don't have a life insurance policy. I don't really have any significant financial assets that anybody would benefit from or miss, um but there's still things like once in a while maybe I'll think about like who would I want to have my phone like so that kind of thing, but I don't think about like any of that because I think I take for granted, oh yeah, I'm gonna die when I'm old and that's still far away, but I don't think about any kind of implications or like people would have to, somebody's gonna have to pay for my funeral. I don't have money for them to do that.
That is a concern. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. So what do you think the challenging part of death is beyond the grief? Because I know I mean, the grief can overtake you, but you still have to live. You can live with the grief, but I guess one of the things that I see that it has changed my perspective of living. So what do you think beyond grief? How would you handle a, a death in your family or a death of a loved one?
Yeah, I think it would involve, I think initially from what I've like read and heard from people, because nobody close to me that I have any responsibility towards has died. It's been uncles, grandparents, things like that. And I think that initially I would go into like my full like producer mode, like, okay, these are the things we need to get, and this is how and I might have like I might also be hurting at the same time, but I think like I would go into, what are we going to do with their stuff? What are we going to, who's getting invited to the funeral? What are we choosing for like how that goes? I think in a sudden death situation, it's really hard because they had no say in how they were going to pass. So you don't necessarily know, especially if they're young, whether they want to be cremated or like what they're feeling. Sometimes you might not know what somebody's deepest feelings are about the afterlife. So you don't know how to make it sacred for them. And so I think there would be a lot of like that kind of a thing. Then I think eventually what you've got, like maybe they have life insurance or their will, and that has to go to whoever. And I guess somebody gets appointed to do those things.
Yeah, that is one of the difficult things with my cousin. It ended up not being his mother, my aunt. It was his ex-wife because my aunt, that was her only child.
She couldn't deal with
She couldn't
it.
deal with it.
And so was the relationship with the ex-wife like a really positive one?
Oh,
where
they
like
were co-parent.
so
They were
she
good
kind of
co-parent.
came and
Yeah, it wasn't.
yeah, yeah.
It wasn't
So
an
that was
estrangement.
a blessing because I know sometimes in when parents pass, especially like people end up fighting over their assets or they have completely different opinions about stuff, and that can be really hard. So but that's really interesting. I've also never thought about like when you're thinking about your loved ones, especially if you know they might pass, like what are you gonna do if is there a chain of command? Like what are you gonna do if you can't keep it together?
I'm like, you weren't in the military or anything, right? No. It's just you said chain of command. I was like,
I have a friend who's in the military. Okay. It's getting in my brain.
Okay.
Oh,
this so sounded funny. Like you were like, I have a point by point list of things to do.
Yeah, but like I don't know, but I guess maybe it's one of those things I mean, I'm interested in your opinion on this. How much should people really be? How much planning is enough versus like there's just going to be weird stuff where somebody has a meltdown or something's going to come along or you're going to find out about some wish that they had that you don't know how to handle, like, and you just have to roll with it.
I think that one of the things that was a benefit is knowing that different people have different strengths. And Deidre, my cousin's ex-wife, is definitely more of a I have a list of things to do and I'm going to tick all everything off and make sure everything gets done. And I am someone that I can be type A sometimes, but not all the time. And a lot of times I'm just like, whatever happens. And I'm so happy that there was someone in the family that could do those things, that can have the list and be prepared and even know what was going to happen with not only with the funeral, but post the funeral, the repast and stuff like that. So I do think it's great. And this is when you realize how important it is to have people with different skill sets in your life.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And that role, you hear about that sometimes where people are like, oh, I haven't grieved yet because I was doing all this stuff. And they kind of beat themselves up about it. But I think one has to give oneself credit that, like, okay, you stepped in. That was what you needed to do.
Yeah.
And you couldn't fall apart. Somebody had to keep it
Someone
together.
has to keep it together.
And it's great that it was you, but now you need to make some time to
Exactly.
be able to process because yeah, technically you really couldn't. When I'm upset about something, I cannot do two things at once. Like I cannot, I can kind of push myself to like maybe get through the workday or something, but I can't be good at that thing, especially if it directly relates to the thing I'm upset about. So yeah, that's really interesting. Well, how much do you think people should then, like, I mean, how much would you or are you planning for your own like death? Or what are you like thinking about ultimately appointing people ahead of time to do, asking them for, can you do this or that, or like what do you think?
I mean, me personally, I've told my immediate family I want to be cremated. I just think that is, I mean, efficient, I guess. I just don't think the whole idea of burying the whole body and stuff like that, not really interested in that. And so, and other than that, I don't really have any other concrete plans. I know, I know, I don't know anyone who is, like the whole idea that women plan for their weddings to have a child. I don't know anyone that morbid to plan for their funeral like that. So I think it only happens.
Oh wait, I have a funeral song picked out for myself.
Okay, what's a funeral song?
I have done that. My Way, the like Frank Sinatra
Oh,
song
okay,
or whatever.
okay.
But that reminded me. That's
No,
funny. But you're right. Yeah,
maybe you
people
should
don't
come
do
up with a
that.
funeral song.
Yeah.
Um, yes. I mean, I really just I haven't really thought that much about it, but I do think that it should not just be for people who are older or who are terminally ill. I think we all should have somewhat of an idea.
Yeah.
And be able to communicate it to someone.
Yeah.
Because it will alleviate them from having to do all this extra thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. That creates so much stress. Yeah. Um, what do you think? This is kind of changing gears here, but this is about still the idea of people having a say. What do you think my opinion is about people planning their own death and when they're going to pass?
I mean, I just feel like, even though I don't know you very well, I do think that having some autonomy or having some control is important to you if it can be done, I guess. Yes, I do believe, I personally believe in dying with dignity. I think of people who are, suffering and suffering in the fact that they're in pain, in constant pain, and it's not going to get any better. I do think that a lot of people would choose death over staying alive. It's not, I mean, it's not like some kind of, contest is to live the longest,
Yeah.
Does it make sense,
Yeah. No, and I think about like so awful to say out loud, but people's pets when they're not doing well. I had a friend recently, she had a cat and she showed me a picture and it was just wasting away and it was so ill and it had all these ailments. And I said, I'm sorry, honey, you're gonna have to put her down soon. You know that, right? And she was like, yeah, I know. Like, I'm probably gonna this weekend or whatever. And then the natural course started happening and she brought in a vet for the moment that she felt that the cat was really showing signs it wanted to go, and they helped make it more comfortable. And I'm thinking, we all know intuitively that's what you're supposed to do with your pets. So why do we withhold from other people their own choice to do that? It's not even like yeah, okay, a person can think for themselves, an animal can't, so of course, like, you have to make that decision on their behalf. And sometimes with other people you might have to make a decision on their behalf, but like, the idea that we wouldn't even be allowed to choose that is very bizarre when you look at the way that we relate to the rest of nature. And I feel like sometimes the same people that would be like, oh, your dog has a broken leg, just go out in the back and shoot it, would like absolutely not be for, physician assisted euthanasia or something like that. So, I think it really depends on if the person is in their right mind.
Yes.
Because if somebody is suffering from severe depression or mental health issues or whatever, I mean, I'm a sort of amoral person in the sense that I'm spiritual and I'm like, it's your choice to live however you want to live. And if at some point you end up, I don't judge people for any choices they make. However, I would not personally want a friend to be leaving this earth when they are in some kind of crisis that could be alleviated. But if they have a terminal illness and they've chosen to pursue an earlier path or whatever it is, like, and they are in charge of themselves and it's actually exercising autonomy, it's ridiculous to me that people would not be allowed to choose.
Yes, and Europe is definitely ahead of us on this, and I do think that eventually, I think it's going to be something that more people will be doing. I mean, us as humans are living on a whole lot longer than we did 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. I mean, they have a category now. We keep talking about the names of the generations, but we have a category called super seniors. And those are people, I think, 85 plus. And that's one of the largest growing demographics, super seniors.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are just, and a lot of them are in good health. Some of them are not. But that's
quality of life. When I witnessed my grandparents, so all through their 70s, they were very young and bright. 70s is young to me still. 80 seems to be a pretty universal turning point where I notice that people tend to start showing more signs of maybe they're not as with it. They're not as fast, or they're just a little bit more feeble, but also their mind is sort of changing a little bit. And you start to be like, okay, that's not a person that is really equipped for certain things. Though you see there's celebrities out there like Jane Fonda or whatever, well into their 80s, totally with it. So, but there's a shift that can start to happen around then. And then I would say, like, I mean, and there are outliers. There totally are. But I would say I've typically witnessed, like, in my grandparents, especially, once they turn 90, quality of life took such a hard nosedive that they're really just sitting in a chair, looking at the TV with each other, but not really there. So, and it requires so much investment in terms of still bringing them visitors if you can, like, and then if you can't afford to provide care, then they begin really suffering. So that's a really challenging thing that I think would be interesting in time, is if we're talking about people who are like in really bad cases, but even just being old and not wanting to be around anymore because you're just kind of old. I think, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting, gets a little bit edgier for me if somebody's like, I don't want to live past 75.
I know.
But
I
if
don't
you're
know.
95, yeah,
I don't
check me
know.
out. Yeah.
I think this is I think this is going to be a discussion that's going to be happening all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
especially in developed countries where there are a lot of people who, because of medical advances, access to good food and walkable spaces, all the things that keep you healthy.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, just because you can, do you have to? I don't know. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't have the answer to that, but I just think the discussions are going to continue as more and more people get that age, and those people who get the age are either, people who worked in government, or people who work in business, people who've kind of seen, what has happened over the last 50, 60, 70 years, because they've been, up in their 90s, and are like, okay, so how is this going to work past that? I
Mm.
just think, because the older you get, I mean, I'm older than you, but I just know I keep gaining perspective on life.
Mm-hmm.
It's so weird because the day to day, the little minor things, obviously you have to pay attention to. But whenever I get a moment, whether I'm walking, around the park or whatever, it's what, 20,000 feet, that corporate term. I get big thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and I get more and more big thoughts the older I get. And it
Mm-hmm.
is either about, how do I want to live my life? How do I want to interact with other humans other than my family?
Mm-hmm.
How do I want to be my best self? And if I'm not my best self, what can I do for that? So all those things, those big picture thoughts happen the older you get. So if you're like 90, you're going to start thinking about that too. And then you're like, okay, well, how do I want to live the rest of my days? And
Yeah.
this, how does it make sense? Am I putting my family, you know, in financial distress because I'm hanging out? I mean,
Yeah.
I
Well, it's interesting because I feel like there must be a turning point where, like, as you're getting older, probably again, maybe through, I don't know, it's a different age for everyone, but at least through your 70s, like you're continuing to gain wisdom and you're continuing to gain wisdom, and your life is improving by the knowledge that you've got. But maybe at some point you reach like this pinnacle of like, I have enough knowledge to have fully appreciated life and understood myself, and I don't have any further ambition here. And so now I know my time is up.
Sky, to take it back to business terms, it's like diminishing returns at some
Yeah.
point. And I don't know what,
Yeah.
it's like, where is it? It's obviously not one point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I think it does get to that level. And then you're like,
Yeah.
okay, so what are we doing?
Yeah. So, what age do you think I want to die?
I'm throwing out 90, but I don't know.
No, that's a good number. No, I really don't think I don't want to go past, like, if it is okay at some point and I'm comfortable with letting myself pass, unless I have something that like is keeping me here, I wouldn't want to live past 95, honestly. But 90, I would be quite happy if yeah, I think that's like kind of a perfect number of like I would have felt like I
Yeah.
did all the times. Yeah. Yeah. What age would you want to die?
Yeah, I don't want to be a centenarian, so definitely probably no more than 90. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, some, I think of like some people living, the idea of living is their best revenge. And I do think that, and this is more on a societal level, meaning like I do think that like Jimmy Carter stayed alive so long to outlive some of the people he didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that for some, maybe, but I don't. I I'm proud to say I don't have any enemies I know of that I need to outlive. So if I live a long time, it's just because I want to. It's not out of pettiness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh man. We talked about what does it mean for each of us to die with dignity. So let's take a guess at those. Let me guess yours first. I would say having a choice over where you are probably makes a big difference and who you're around.
Yes.
Probably even including who you're not around. Um, because that's coming to my mind. I'm like, there's some people I wouldn't necessarily want to have to be part of that. Um, and then just being able to like maybe choose your song or a eulogy or something like, and just being able to say goodbye to everybody and be somewhere pretty.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it'd be a Spotify playlist or something like that, but definitely some of my favorite music. I think that would be really cool. I even though I'm very close to my immediate family, my mom, my dad, my two sisters, my niece and nephews, I have an extended family of my friends that I see like once a year up in New York, and I would want them to be there. Um, so I think that pretty much is my circle. It wouldn't be less than 10 people, but it'd be the best 10 people. I would want them to be around. I don't think about my death too much, but every once in a while I think like who would come to my funeral?
Yeah. Oh my God. I know. Me too.
And I think everyone does. And I don't know if it's kind of like, would it be a big funeral? Would it be a lot of people? Would it be all your exes and, even people who you used to work with, who you kind of liked, but whatever. So I don't know, isn't it Tom Sawyer where that kind of happened? Like, what was it, Huck Finn? One of those, Mark Twain. But it was a whole thing of like they thought he was dead and he was at his own funeral.
That's right.
I don't want to. I don't want that to actually happen. Meaning, like, I don't want to be at my own funeral and see it and actually still be alive. I don't want to cause that trauma to people. But I do want. I do want to know what people. Yeah, I do want to know who's gonna come, who's all gonna be there. I do. I think it's kind of like I wouldn't call it narcissism, but I do think it's something that everyone wants to know.
Yeah.
It's like kind of like some kind of gauge of how much you will be missed or how much you're loved.
Yeah.
So
How much you mean to people. And what's interesting, I was just thinking, I wonder how many people like do a pre-funeral that they're like sitting there and everyone's talking nice about them and stuff. But then it's like, God, would people think that you're an absolute dick if you're like, I'm dying of cancer and I want everyone to come?
people have done that though.
Yeah.
I know people have
Yeah.
done that.
Yeah. I would absolutely love that. I'd be too embarrassed to admit it. Or ask for it at least. I just admitted it. But yeah. What do you think it would mean for me to die with dignity?
I think for you to die with what it would mean for you is I the first thing I think of is peace. I think of peace of mind for yourself, for your families, for your loved ones, and what that means for you. Probably having the funeral arrangement, having everything organized, so you're not a burden to your family or to your loved ones. I think also dying with dignity is having, if it is possible, if it's not a sudden death, having some choice, having some agency. I think that's one of the things that we all want in living and in death is you want choice, you want freedom. I mean, this is where freedom of where you live, freedom of where you die, everywhere along your life I mean, it is that struggle of, okay, what are my choices? How do I have freedom? What is always like, okay, what can I do?
Mm.
And when you don't have a choice, when you don't have control, and that's when you can't, well, it'll be harder to die with dignity when you don't have that control. Obviously, when you're dead, you're dead. But I'm just saying, I mean, um, like if the funeral or whatever, the final arrangements were not of your wishes, or how, or totally opposed to what you want. Like, let's just say if it was like, it was all done by someone who did not know you.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I mean, more than anything else.
Yeah, that really quickly reminds me of when we were talking about like who you want to be there, or who we like. Some people, a lot of people, don't have any choice of who shows up or how it happens or who knows when. And like it's, yeah, if you don't have control over your death, I think that's probably one of the things that's really hard when you lose someone suddenly, must be knowing they didn't have that, and grieving on their behalf too, knowing they didn't want to pass, they wanted plenty more time, and they didn't get to say what happened is part of the pain that you experience, I'm sure. And then for me, like if I'm thinking about either being ill or being old, and I think you like absolutely nailed it, the sense of like peace, literally peace and love. Oh my God. But truly being loved by the people around me, and knowing that I like connected with everyone that I cared about before I left. But yeah, that really resonated, like just a sense of like peacefulness, and like knowing it's okay and it's time and it's all right would be, yeah, would be really nice. Oh boy. Well, do we have any other burning questions, or what was, yeah, go ahead.
We covered it all.
Yeah, we really did.
We really did. Yeah.
What are some resources you had like rattled off all these different things, like whenever you host a discussion or in general that people like don't know about, that are available to them or that they should look into? So can you kind of list some of those out?
Okay, so when it comes on the practical financial part of preparing for death, is getting a will. If you have a significant amount of assets, setting up a trust. Finding someone who is a financial planner that could help you, but also someone who is really good with trusts and estates and wills. The other thing is a lot of cable TV ads, and even streaming ads that are targeted toward, and it's obvious that they're targeted toward older people. They're always telling people to take out life insurance, and sometimes that life insurance is I don't know, I forget the difference between term and full life, but I do know that sometimes that insurance that they're paying into is not going to elicit the type of money that they think it's going to.
Yeah, that's the term one, I think.
Yeah, so you have to really pay attention to that. And then just also, I know it's just real basic, maybe just setting up some money that someone can get to access easily, because that was another thing of just to take care of your funeral costs. So if it's just your brother, your sister, your mom or dad, and just say, I'm just going to make you a cosigner on this account, this savings account, so they can just get to the money easily, because you never know.
Yeah.
And then
you can be as affordable as you want.
Yeah. And then, I mean, on the spiritual side, I would love to, whenever I do this talk, is really, I know people who are birth doulas. I want to talk to someone who is a death doula. And I think that is And I don't know if this is more of a career a thing that may increase. I'm pretty sure there are more death doulas now than there were like 10 years ago. Um, but I think it's super important to help people, especially if they're terminally ill. And even if they're not, because honestly, if I just had a talk with a deaf doula and just kind of had a discussion on what I wanted, how to die with dignity, even if I'm not going to die for another 20 years, that would be great just to have that conversation.
Yeah. 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 And one random resource that somebody told me to think about is, if you're planning for old age, she said, she's single, she doesn't plan on having a partner when she passes. And, someone told her, a financial planner said, start saving for your caregivers or the home that you might want to be in, or like some kind of care for yourself, so that you've just got like something set aside that and all those things kind of give you that peace of mind that we're talking about too, as well as the practical. Cool. Well, where can people find you?
Well, I'm on Instagram at Niche ST, so NICHEST. And then I have a Substack, and it's nichelle.substack.com. And on that Substack, it's basically a food and culture newsletter that I put out every week. Normally, I have some links to some recipes. I talk about something. Hopefully, I've cooked something that week. And then I'll have a couple of recommendations that may have nothing to do with food. It could be a book. It could be a link to something on YouTube. It could be art, that I think is interesting. So it's kind of like a mishmash, but a lot about food and a little bit about culture.
I love that. I love that. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Nichelle. This was
Thank
awesome.
you.